The day they told her to leave, the wind carried dust across the yard like it had something to say. It curled around her shoes, crept up the steps, and slipped through the open door of a house that had never truly felt like hers. She stood there with a small bundle in her hands and a quiet storm in her chest, listening as her mother-in-law's voice turned colder than the dry land outside. It had not happened all at once. Things like this never do. It started with small looks across the dinner table, words that sounded polite but carried sharp edges, and long silences that spoke louder than anything else. Her husband had stopped meeting her eyes weeks ago. By the time that final morning came, she already knew what was waiting for her. "You'll be better off somewhere else," they said, as if they were doing her a kindness. Somewhere else. That was all she had left. She stepped off the porch without looking back. The road stretched out in front of her, pale and endless under the wide sky. A wagon passed in the distance, its wheels kicking up dust, the driver barely giving her a glance. Life moved on quickly out here. No one stopped for long. She walked for hours. The sun climbed high, pressing down on her shoulders, but she kept going. Each step felt like it was pulling her further from the life she had known, and closer to something she could not yet see. She had no plan, no clear destination, just a stubborn feeling that she was not finished yet. By late afternoon, she reached a small trading post near the edge of town. It was the kind of place where people came to sell what they no longer needed and buy what they could barely afford. The wooden sign out front creaked in the wind, and the smell of old timber and dust filled the air inside. That was where she first heard about the cabin. "It's nothing much," the man behind the counter said, scratching his chin. "Been sitting empty for years. Roof's half gone, walls ain't much better. Folks say it's not worth the trouble." She listened quietly, her fingers tightening around the few coins she had left. "How much?" she asked. He looked at her, surprised, then he gave a small shrug. $5, and I'd still say you're overpaying." $5, it was almost nothing. And yet, it was everything she had. She stepped outside and stared at the horizon. The wind had picked up again, brushing against her face like a whisper. Somewhere out there was a broken-down log cabin that no one wanted, a place forgotten by everyone else. It sounded a lot like her. "I'll take it," she said when she went back inside. The man raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. He wrote out a simple paper, slid it across the counter, and took her money. Just like that, it was done. No ceremony, no witnesses, no one to mark the moment. But for her, it felt like the first real step she had taken in a long time. The cabin stood alone on a stretch of dry land far from the main road. When she finally reached it, the sun was beginning to sink, casting long shadows across the ground. The place looked even worse than she had imagined. The wood was cracked and faded, the door hung crooked on its hinges, and the small garden patch out front had turned to dust. For a moment she just stood there. Anyone else might have turned around. Anyone else might have called it a mistake. But she walked forward instead. She pushed the door open, and it creaked like it had been waiting for someone to return. Inside, the air was thick and still. There was nothing but a broken table, a few scattered boards, and silence. Yet something about it felt honest. It did not pretend to be more than it was. That night she slept on the bare floor with her bundle as a pillow. The wind slipped through the cracks in the walls, and the stars shone through the gaps in the roof. It should have felt lonely, it should have felt hopeless. But it didn't, because for the first time in a long while, no one was watching her. No one was judging her. No one was telling her where she belonged. Morning came with a pale light and a quiet promise. She stepped outside and looked at the land around her. It was dry, yes, harsh even, but not dead, not yet. She knelt down and pressed her hand into the soil. It was rough and stubborn beneath her fingers, but she could feel something deeper, something waiting. Back in town, word began to spread. People talked the way they always did, with a mix of curiosity and doubt. "Bought that old place for $5, someone said with a laugh. "Won't last a month out there." Her former family heard the same stories. They shook their heads, certain they had been right all along. Certain she would come back, asking for help, ready to admit her mistake. But weeks passed, then months. And slowly, something began to change on that forgotten piece of land. Something no one had expected. By the time the first wagon stopped at the edge of her property, the dry ground was no longer the only thing people noticed. And what they saw next left them speechless. The wagon slowed before it reached her gate, the driver leaning forward as if his eyes might be playing tricks on him. He had passed this stretch of land more times than he could count, and it had always been the same. Dry earth, brittle grass, and that lonely cabin standing like it had given up. But now there was color, real color. Rows of green broke through the brown soil, neat and steady, as if someone had drawn life back into the ground by hand. She noticed him watching and straightened up from where she was working. Her hands were covered in dirt, her dress faded from the sun, but her eyes held something new, something steady. "Morning," she called, wiping her hands against her apron. The man climbed down slowly, still looking around. "I heard talk in town," he said. "Didn't believe it at first. Most people didn't, not at the start." She gave a small nod and went back to her work, not offering more than that. She had learned quickly that people would come with questions, but not all of them came with good intentions. Some were curious, some were doubtful, and some were just waiting to see her fail. He stepped closer to the garden, crouching near one of the rows. "How'd you manage this?" he asked, running his fingers lightly over the leaves. "This land ain't been kind to anyone." She paused, thinking about how to answer. The truth was not simple. It had been long days and longer nights. It had been trial and error, hope and disappointment, and a kind of stubbornness she did not know she had until she needed it. "I just kept trying," she said finally. That was all she gave him. He let out a quiet breath, then stood and looked toward the cabin. It had changed too. The roof was patched with new wood, the door now straight and firm. A small stream of water ran along a narrow channel she had dug herself, leading from a shallow well she had cleared and rebuilt. It was not much to look at by town standards, but out here it felt like something close to a miracle. "You planning to sell?" he asked after a moment. She shook her head. "Not right now." He studied her face as if trying to understand what drove her. Then he nodded, climbed back onto his wagon, and rode off, leaving behind a trail of dust and more questions than answers. By the time he reached town, the story had already begun to grow. "They say she's growing crops out there," one person said at the general store. "On that land?" another replied. "That's not possible." But curiosity has a way of spreading faster than doubt. Within days, more people found reasons to pass by her property. Some slowed their wagons just enough to take a look. Others stopped outright, pretending they had business nearby. They all saw the same thing, and none of them could quite explain it. She noticed the change, of course. The way eyes lingered longer than before. The way whispers followed her when she came into town for supplies. But she kept her head down and her routine steady. Wake before sunrise. Check the water channel. Tend to the soil, fix what needed fixing. Rest only when there was nothing left to do. Still, even as the land began to give back, something else stayed with her, a quiet tension that never fully left. It sat in the back of her mind, like a shadow that stretched just beyond the edge of the light. Part of it came from memory. She could still hear her mother-in-law's voice, sharp and certain. Still see the way her husband had stood there without saying a word. That silence had followed her out here, settling into the walls of the cabin, echoing in the quiet moments between work. At night, when the wind moved through the trees and the stars filled the sky, she would sit by the door and let those thoughts come and go. She did not push them away, but she did not let them take hold either. She had learned that much. Then there was the land itself. It had not given in easily. The first few weeks had been the hardest. The soil had cracked under her hands, refusing water as if it no longer believed in it. The well had been nearly dry when she found it, hidden beneath fallen boards and years of neglect. Clearing it had taken all the strength she had, and more than once she had wondered if it was worth the effort. But the water had come back, slowly at first, then steady enough to trust. And once it did, everything else began to shift. Still, there were moments that did not make sense. Some mornings she would find the soil already damp before she had opened the channel. Other times, small changes appeared overnight, as if the land had moved on its own. She told herself it was just the way the ground settled, or the wind, or something simple she had overlooked. But deep down, she was not entirely sure. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft gold, she noticed something new at the far edge of her property, a set of wagon tracks that had not been there before. They cut across the dry ground and stopped just short of her garden, as if whoever had come did not want to be seen. She stood still, her heart beating a little faster than it should. No one had called out, no one had knocked on her door. And yet someone had been there. She followed the tracks with her eyes until they faded into the distance. The land was quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt too complete. For the first time since she had arrived, the place did not feel entirely her own. She turned slowly, looking back at the cabin, at the rows of green that had drawn so much attention. For a brief moment, the pride she had built began to mix with something else, something sharper. Because if people were watching from a distance before, now it seemed like someone had stepped closer, and they had done it without leaving a word behind. She did not sleep much that night. Every small sound felt louder than it should have. The wind against the wood, the soft creak of the roof, even the faint trickle of water through the channel seemed to carry a warning. She lay still on her bed, eyes open in the dark, listening. At first light, she stepped outside and walked straight to the edge of the property. The wagon tracks were still there, clearer now under the morning sun. They were fresh, not more than a few hours old when she first noticed them. Whoever had come had chosen their moment carefully. She followed them a little way, but they soon faded into the harder ground beyond her land. It was as if the visitor had known exactly where to stop and how to leave without being followed. That thought stayed with her as she went back to her work. In town, the talk had taken on a different tone. Curiosity had shifted into something sharper. Some people spoke with quiet admiration, while others lowered their voices and shared doubts that grew more serious with each telling. "It's not natural," one man said near the store counter. "Land like that doesn't just turn green overnight." Another leaned closer. "You ever notice how she doesn't say much about it? Keeps things to herself? Makes you wonder." Not everyone agreed. A few defended her, saying she had simply worked harder than anyone else would have. But even they could not explain everything. Her former family heard these stories too. At first they laughed them off, certain it would all fall apart soon enough. But as more people came back with the same account, their confidence began to shift. "She run out of luck?" her mother-in-law said one evening, though her voice carried less certainty than before. "Things like that don't last." Her husband did not answer. He sat by the window, staring out at the fading light. Something about the way he listened had changed. The silence he had carried before was no longer empty. It was filled with something heavier. Back at the cabin, she noticed other changes. A section of the fence she had repaired just days ago was disturbed, one of the posts leaning at an odd angle. It was not broken, just moved enough to catch her attention. She checked the ground and found faint marks, like someone had stepped there and tried to cover it. Her chest tightened slightly, but she did not panic. Not yet. She fixed the post and kept working, though her eyes moved more often toward the open land beyond her garden. The feeling of being watched did not leave. It lingered, quiet but steady. Later that afternoon, a young boy from town arrived, sent with a small delivery of supplies she had ordered. He handed over the package and lingered, his curiosity getting the better of him. "Is it true," he asked, glancing at the rows of crops, "that this place was empty before you came?" She gave a small nod. He looked around again, wide-eyed. "My pa says someone might try to take it from you?" "Says land like this don't stay unnoticed." She studied him for a moment, then gave a calm reply. "People can try." The boy shifted his weight, unsure what to say next. Then he tipped his hat and hurried back toward the road, as if staying too long might bring trouble with it. His words stayed with her. That evening she walked the full length of her property, slower than usual. She checked the well, the channel, the edges of the garden. Everything seemed in place, yet nothing felt quite as it had before. At the far end, near where the wagon tracks had stopped, she noticed something half buried in the dirt. She knelt down and brushed the soil away. It was a small piece of metal, worn and dull, shaped like part of a tool or a marker. She turned it over in her hand, trying to make sense of it. It did not belong to anything she owned. She slipped it into her pocket, her thoughts turning. This land had been abandoned for years, or so she had been told, but now she was not so sure. The well, the soil, the strange changes she could not fully explain, and now this. It all pointed to a past that had not been completely forgotten. As the sun began to set, she stood and looked out across the fields. The green rows moved gently in the evening breeze, a quiet sign of everything she had built. But beyond them, the land stretched wide and uncertain. Somewhere out there, someone knew more than they had said, and they had already come close enough to leave their mark. And the next morning brought more than just light. As she stepped outside, she saw a figure standing at the edge of her property, still and waiting, not hiding this time, not passing through. Just standing there, as if they had every right to be. She stood still for a moment, her hand tightening slightly at her side. The figure at the edge of her land did not move, did not call out, just waited as if the silence between them meant something. The morning air felt different. Not calm, not tense, just full of something that had been building for days. She stepped forward slowly, keeping her eyes on the stranger. The ground beneath her feet was firm, the same land she had worked on day after day, yet it felt like she was walking into something unknown. When she got closer, she saw it was an older man. His clothes were worn from travel, dust clinging to the edges, but he stood straight, steady in a way that suggested he knew exactly why he was there. "You've been busy," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. She stopped a few steps away. "This is my land." He gave a small nod as if he expected that answer. His eyes moved across the garden, the water channel, the repaired cabin. There was no surprise in his expression, only recognition. "That's what they're saying in town," he replied. "Saying you turned this place into something it hasn't been in a long time." She did not respond right away. The wind passed between them, lifting a bit of dust into the air. "You've been coming here at night," she said finally. It was not a question. The man looked back at her, and for a moment something shifted in his face. Not guilt, not quite. Something closer to concern. "I needed to see it for myself," he said. "And the tracks," she continued, her voice steady. "The fence, the things left behind." He let out a slow breath. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Her gaze hardened just a little. "You already have?" They stood there in silence again, the space between them holding more than words. She could feel it now, the truth that had been circling just out of reach. "This land," he began, glancing out over the fields, "was never as empty as folks think. People gave up on it, sure. But not everyone walked away the same way." She felt a quiet tension rise in her chest. "What does that mean?" Before he could answer, the sound of wheels broke through the moment. Another wagon approached from the road, moving faster than most that passed through. She turned her head, her eyes narrowing slightly as it came closer. By the time it reached the edge of her property, she already knew who it was. Her former family. The wagon came to a stop, and they climbed down one by one. Her mother-in-law looked around first, her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and something sharper. Her husband followed, slower, his eyes fixed on the land rather than on her. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The green rose, the steady flow of water, the cabin standing strong against the open sky, it all said more than words could. "This?" her mother-in-law finally said, her voice tight. "This is what you've been doing." She did not answer right away. She stood her ground, the same way she had on the day she left, only now there was something different in her stance. "Yes," she said simply. Her husband stepped forward a little, his eyes moving across the garden, then back to her. There was something unsettled in his expression, like he was trying to match the person he remembered with the one standing in front of him. "You did all this?" he asked quietly. She met his gaze. "I had to." The older man remained where he was, watching the exchange carefully. His presence had not gone unnoticed. Her mother-in-law's eyes shifted toward him, suspicion rising quickly. "And who is this?" she demanded. No one answered immediately. The tension tightened, pulling all of them into the same moment. The man finally spoke. "Someone who knows this land better than most?" That did not ease anything. If anything, it made things worse. Her mother-in-law crossed her arms, her voice sharper now. "We heard enough stories in town to know something isn't right here. Land like this doesn't change overnight. There's always a reason." She took a step forward, her tone firm but controlled. "There is a reason. Work, time, and not giving up when it's easier to walk away. The words hung in the air, heavier than they sounded. Her husband looked down for a moment, then back at the ground around him. The water channel caught his attention, the way it moved steady and clear through the soil. He crouched slightly, studying it like he was trying to understand something deeper. "This wasn't here before," he said. "No," she replied. "It wasn't." The older man shifted his weight as if deciding how much to say. His eyes moved from one face to another, measuring the moment. "There are things about this place," he began slowly, "that people forgot. Things that were hidden when the land dried up. Not gone, just waiting." Her heart beat a little faster. She had felt it too, in small ways she could not explain. Her mother-in-law let out a short laugh, though it did not sound amused. Waiting for what? Someone like her to come along and claim it? The man did not react to the tone. Waiting for someone who wouldn't turn their back on it. Silence fell again, thicker this time. The wind picked up, moving through the crops, carrying a low, rustling sound across the land. It felt like the ground itself was part of the conversation now. Her husband stood up slowly, his expression more serious than before. "If what you're saying is true," he said, looking between her and the older man, "then this place isn't just any piece of land." "No," the man replied quietly. "It isn't." That was when another sound reached them. Not from the road this time, from somewhere beneath. It was faint, but real enough to make all of them pause. A low, steady shift, like something deep in the ground had begun to move. She felt it through her feet, a subtle vibration that spread across the soil she had worked so hard to bring back to life. No one spoke. No one moved. Because whatever had been hidden beneath that land was no longer staying quiet. The sound beneath the ground grew a little stronger, like a slow breath rising from deep below. She felt it through her feet, steady and alive. The soil that had once been dry and lifeless now carried something powerful, something that refused to stay hidden any longer. Her mother-in-law stepped back, her face tightening. "What is that?" she asked, her voice no longer as certain as before. The older man did not look afraid. If anything, he looked like he had been waiting for this moment. He walked a few steps forward and knelt near the edge of the water channel, placing his hand lightly against the ground. "It's the spring," he said quietly. No one spoke right away. "The land here was built on it," he continued, glancing up at them. "Years ago this place had more water than most could use. Crops grew strong, families settled, and this cabin was part of that life. But over time, people stopped caring for it. The channels broke, the well got buried, and the spring slowed. Not gone, just trapped." She felt a shift inside her, like pieces of a puzzle coming together. The damp soil she had noticed, the steady return of water, the way the land had responded to her work. It had never been just effort alone. She had uncovered something that was already there, waiting. "You're saying this was always possible?" her husband asked, his voice quieter now. The older man nodded. "Possible, yes." "Easy, no, it takes patience. It takes someone willing to stay when others walk away." Her mother-in-law looked around again, but this time there was no sharp edge in her expression, only a kind of disbelief she could not hide. "And she just found it?" she said, almost to herself. "She didn't just find it," the man replied. "She brought it back." Those words settled into the silence. The ground gave one last soft shift, then stilled. The water in the channel flowed a little stronger now, clearer than before, catching the morning light as it moved. It was not something wild or dangerous. It was something steady, something meant to be used, not feared. She took a slow breath and looked out over the land. The green rose, the repaired cabin, the water that now moved with quiet confidence. All of it stood as proof of what she had done, even when no one believed she could. Her husband stepped closer, his eyes no longer uncertain. "I didn't see it before," he said, his voice low. "I should have." She met his gaze, but there was no anger left in her, only distance shaped by what had already passed. "You didn't want to see it?" she answered gently. He nodded, accepting it without argument. Her mother-in-law shifted her stance, her pride still there, but quieter now. "We thought you'd come back," she admitted. "Thought you'd realize you couldn't manage on your own." She looked around once more, taking in every part of the place. "I was wrong." It was not a full apology, but it was more than she had expected. The older man stood and brushed the dust from his hands. "This land will keep giving if it's cared for," he said, "but it also draws attention. People will come, some with good intentions, some without. You'll have to decide what to do with that." She understood what he meant. The whispers in town, the curious eyes, the quiet doubts. This place was no longer invisible. "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. He gave a small smile. "I didn't think you would." The tension that had been building for so long began to ease. Not all at once, but enough to let the air feel lighter. Her husband looked toward the cabin, then back at her. "If you ever need help," he said, choosing his words carefully, "I'd like to try to make things right." She studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "We'll see." It was not a promise, but it was not a refusal either. Her mother-in-law said nothing more. She turned back toward the wagon, her steps slower than before, as if she was carrying something new with her. Not defeat, but understanding. The older man began to walk away as well, stopping only once to glance back at the land. "You did something rare here," he said. "Don't forget that." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the quiet strength of the place she had built. Days passed, and the story spread further, but this time it carried a different tone. Not just doubt or curiosity, but respect. People came not only to see, but to learn. Some asked for advice, others offered fair trade for what she grew. The small log cabin that had once been forgotten became known as a place of second chances. She worked as she always had, steady and focused, but now there was a sense of purpose that reached beyond survival. She was not just rebuilding land. She was proving something simple and true. That being cast out did not mean being finished. That something dismissed as worthless could hold more than anyone imagined. And that sometimes the smallest beginning, even a $5 cabin on dry ground, could grow into something strong enough to change every mind that once doubted it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the water moved gently through the channel, she stood at the edge of her garden and looked out across the fields. The land no longer felt lonely. It felt like home. Thanks for watching this story. Subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Tell me in the comments what you felt about this story and what kind of stories you want to see next. Until then, take care of yourself and remember, even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's whole life. See you in the next story.